This is 1059 The Region, where parents talk and explore practical, proactive, and evidence-based solutions. This is Where Parents Talk with Lianne Castelino.
Welcome to Where Parents Talk here on 1059 The Region. Thanks for joining us. I'm Lianne Castelino. Have you ever considered creating a parenting strategy? Do you have a roadmap and specific tactics for how you want to raise your child? Our guest today checks off all of those boxes. He has worked in politics, on Capitol Hill, in healthcare and other departments, as well as for members of Congress, the U.S. Senate, and the U.S. House of Representatives for over 25 years. Jeff Nelligan is also an author and a father of 3 boys, all of whom are in the military. One of his books is entitled 4 Lessons for My 3 Sons: How You Can Raise Resilient Kids. Jeff Nelligan joins us today from Washington, D.C. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thank you, Lianne, for having me. It's a privilege and, an honor.
Now, you've met a lot of parents across many different things that you do over decades, and you've been quoted as saying that many parents, in your opinion, don't seem to have a defined plan or strategy for guiding their children toward a confident and productive life. What do you mean by that?
Well, I'll make a universal statement here, Lianne, and any parent listening probably has felt this. When you hold your baby for the first time, hours after birth, I know that parent is thinking it because I thought it 3 different times. What is this child going to grow up to be? That's got to be a universal statement about parenthood. And it's not he's going to be this occupation or he's going to live here. It's going to be what kind of human being is he going to be in childhood, he or she, in childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. And so when I start talking about strategy in my book, and it's a good term that you brought up, it's not about letting the culture shape them or the kids that they'll ultimately meet as friends or the parents they're around. It's how do you, the parent, guide them towards being, as you just noted, confident and productive, and bless those qualities that make them that kind of adult that you will be proud of as you hold that 4-hour-old baby.
Now, you had the wherewithal to develop a strategy, understand you needed a strategy, go ahead and practice a strategy, but not all parents maybe have that kind of notion once they become new parents. And certainly there's so many other things as well to think about when you have a newborn. But why do you believe having that strategy in the first place is so important?
Well, the strategy is, again, going back to your first question, is not allowing the culture or anything else to shape that kid. It's the parent shaping the kid. And, the strategy is you want that kid who is instilled with those values that leads to confidence, productivity, decency, honesty, kindness, resilience, and adversity, which is one thing that any kid, any adult needs for throughout their lives. Conduct. But I'll come back to what the kid needs as the strategy is that resilience. And the second part of the strategy is you just don't hope for those things, and you just don't tell he or she, oh, you've got to be this, you've got to be kind and resilient and humble. You've got to place them in situations where they develop those characteristics. And for my strategy, it was placing them always in the real world, which is right outside the front door, in which they saw the good and the bad and the inspirational in individuals and situations, where they knew how to navigate or figure out how to navigate situations and that real world. And so the strategy is built on the qualities you want in the kid, and then how do you instill the qualities, and that is the real world.
So what ages did you start that in your household? And can you give us some examples of how you went about doing that with each of your sons?
Sure. I started it real early. When I say early, the eldest is probably around 6 years old, and the youngest was 3.5, 4. And what I did is when we went out in the real world, I would, as I noted earlier, I would point out the good, the bad, and the inspirational. See something, say something. If you see a parent or an adult holding a door open for a senior or engaging other shy parents in conversation, you point it out and you say, you need to be like that. You need to be like Mr. Pikus, our neighbor, Mr. Gergar, our neighbor. You need to be that person who does that. When you see the bad, you point it out too. If there's a jerk kid, you point it out immediately. A kid being rude to his parents or getting in a major league blow up with teachers or other kids, you say, that kid's a jackass and you never want to be like that. And so they were constantly, in the real world, you'll see these situations all the time. In the real world, I mean, school and athletic fields, the grocery store, the hardware store, neighborhood events, community service. When I saw those, I would point them out and say, and with them have this kind of brief, funny quip that kids, as parents listening know, love to repeat themselves. They love that funny, brief thing, and they'll repeat it forever. And the younger they are, the more they'll repeat it. And so they saw how the world was unfolding, and they had this almost reflex attitude because they had the soundtrack in their mind from the old man that this was good, this was bad, and this is how you should not, replicate that behavior or try to replicate that behavior.
It's an interesting point because as parents, we see things and process them in adult ways, and we don't often know how our kids are taking this information in, how they're processing it. So by pointing it out, if I understand you correctly, you're actually helping your child frame and structure how they're taking in that information.
Correct. And, I go back to the whole resilience argument about which the book is based. And resilience means the idea of driving through adversity and not panicking and not folding up. And so all the instances I would show them, for example, of being in adversity and how to react, to give you an example of how the soundtrack plays out. My 5-year-old son was at a mall for a birthday party, and the parents who were guiding them around, all 13 of them, kids, suddenly vanished and they were totally disorganized, and suddenly vanished, took 10 kids into a movie theater and left my 3 kids in a food court. And alone, all 3 five-year-old kids in this massive downtown mall. And, the kids were panicked, and you can imagine as a parent how panicked they were and how panicked you'd be. But my kid remembered something that I always told him in pointing things out in this real world. If you see a man or a woman with a stripe running down their pants leg, that means it's a security guard or a soldier, and you need to run up to that person immediately and say, "Help me." Well, my kid says this to the other 5-year-olds, and they eventually, a couple of minutes later, find a mall security guard, and he leads them to the incompetent parents. But the idea was, through the examples of all of me pointing this out every time we went out to a game or to a mall, anywhere, the kid didn't flinch. He knew exactly what to do. Again, it's that reflex, that muscle memory. And so, like you said, if you process what you see as an adult and give it to your kids, they'll remember.
So, Jeff, how did you even know to do that, right? Like, you told us that you wanted to have a strategy when your children were born, but how did you know to do it the way that you're describing?
I was lucky to be raised by, my parents and be in a community of people that had, the values, as I say, that I mentioned earlier. And it was also, I go back again, I didn't want the culture to shape them. I didn't want the schools or institutions to shape them. I wanted to shape them. And it comes to something that, may be discordant for your listeners to hear, all parents. But my focus wasn't building a relationship with my kids. It was on teaching my kids to build a relationship with the whole world, because that's where they were going to be most of their lives, beginning the first day they went to school. It wasn't going to be around me. And if you're a parent, you already have a relationship with a kid. That's why they call it a parent. So the strategy came from that. And it was a plan because, like I said in the beginning, you're looking at this little baby and you say, what's he going to be? And or he or she's going to be. And then you think, well, I'm going to be the one that's going to guide them to be who they are going to be. And it seemed pretty fundamental at the time, and it seemed to work. So throughout their childhood and adolescence, all the way to where they are now, they've always had that plan, and they were able to acquire those qualities that I thought were important and that pushed them along in all their schooling and everywhere else to where they are today.
You are listening to Where Parents Talk on 105.9 The Region. I'm Lianne Castelino in conversation with Jeff Nelligan, father of 3 and author. Your sons are now 28, 26, and 24, and your book came out in the last couple of years and has recently been updated as well. Those are 2 very different times we're talking about. 20 plus years ago when you first became a dad, and now where we are in the world with the internet, social media, technology, etc. So what was your impetus for writing this book?
Lianne, it's a super observation on your part, because that's exactly one of the reasons why I wrote the book. When they were growing up, it was just at the beginning of the whole internet exploding into the absolute leviathan that it is today. And, the first iPhone, 2007, the real pickup in internet and social media use in 2010, with Snapchat, Facebook in 2006. Early on, when they were young, I kind of thought that, hey, this is not good that kids or anybody is staring at a screen for so often. So my kids didn't get a phone until they were at the end of 11th grade. And they didn't have enormous amounts of time on the computer because I said they couldn't. They had 1 hour a week of video games, and it could only be played on a weekend, which I knew they would be going to athletic events or being involved with other things that would preclude them looking too much at video games. So I cut them off from all of that. We didn't really have a TV that worked very often, and that was by design. So they were spared staring at screens as they were young. And so that was really helpful. And today, the ubiquity of screens, social media, what I call the glowing rectangle, whether it's a tablet, a phone, a laptop, a full-blown computer. Kids today, an average teen spends 8 hours and 49 minutes on their phone. That's more time than they spend sleeping. And that's more time, and that excludes schoolwork. So the idea that a kid's on a phone almost 9 hours a day, first of all, that's wrong. And whatever they're getting, the internet's it can be a filthy place. I don't have to be a Puritan to say that. It's the truth. It's also too, where's the parent in all this? Where's the parent if a kid is the parent is looking at a phone, approximately total screen time for a typical adult in this country, in the United States, is about 11 hours and 30 minutes. So that's that fundamental shift of people just staring at screens, and that has a numbing effect. A typical kid today gets 216 different alerts on their phone within a 24-hour period. So they're constantly distracted, and that distraction leads to the current situation of where we have it today. I think also too, it was different when the boys were growing up than it is now. This move towards kind of an equity culture where everything has to be brought down to the mean, and we have to, close the achievement gap, and everyone has to play a quarter of a game. And I don't think that does much for the competitive spirit that's in any girl or boy at all on an athletic field. And I know that because I've spent probably 25 years on athletic fields all over the country and in 5 different sports. So I have a good sense of that nature in a kid. And I think the third thing is just the parent disengagement. You opened this by saying you had a strategy. Yeah, I did. It was pretty primitive, I would say, maybe, but I was engaged. And I'm not sure parents are engaged now as they were, let's say, 20 years ago, before this revolution that you talked about.
Our conversation with Jeff Nelligan, author and father of 3, will continue. Coming up, maintaining a parenting strategy during and after a divorce. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Want to learn more about the show? Email info@whereparentstalk.com. Stick around. Lianne Castelino and Where Parents Talk will be right back on 1059 The Region. Welcome back to Where Parents Talk. Listen live at 1059theregion.com. Here's Lianne Castelino.
Welcome back. We are talking about the benefit and impact of having a parenting strategy. Our guest is Jeff Nelligan, father of 3 and author of 4 Lessons for My 3 Sons, How to Raise Resilient Kids. Jeff, let's pretend that you became a father in the last 10 years or so, and you're now having to deal with a lot of the pain points parents are grappling with today. Screen time, excessive device usage, lack of sleep, bullying, etc. In what ways would the strategy that you employed 28 or so years ago change if you were a father today with a young child?
That's a profound question. I've never been asked that. I would say, and we go back to, first of all, the ubiquity of screens. I wrote a book about this at the end of the pandemic lockdowns. It was called Your Kids Rebound from Pandemic Lockdowns, How You Can Restore Your Family. And the thrust of it was the biggest kind of negative I saw was the increased use of screen time beginning in about April of 2020. And my solution was, and it's in the book, and it's what I would undertake today if I was a parent of kids that age, was a social media contract. Parents and the kids sitting down to say, okay, we've got all these devices. We're using up all this time. Here's the contract. We're turning off the router in the house at 8 o'clock. These websites now are inaccessible to you. You will not pick up a phone when we're in a car or at a restaurant. Your usage will be limited to an hour or 2 hours a day, and we will check. And there are devices now all over the web in which you can just literally shut your kid's phone off. So the idea was just to bring it all in. And then dad and mom have to play the game too. They say, we're not going to be looking at these things whenever we're around you. We're going to cut down our hours every day. So you start to shrink the amount of time. And I gave you the numbers, 8 hour 49, 11:30. You shrink those down so that you're getting back control of your kid. I think the second thing too is, and being a sportscaster, you'll get this. The idea of athletics in a kid's life is huge. And it's not just the athletic field. It can be, the concert band or the marching band. It can be the theatrical stage. It can be the robotics club. But all these things in athletics, it's rather cute. You learn that that's how the real world works. You practice enough and you get better. There is adversity every game. You win or you lose. There's no equity in a final score. You form this camaraderie with your team, and you have to be disciplined enough to play within the boundaries of how good you are, and then to practice and get better. So those qualities are among all those things I mentioned earlier: the theater stage, the band, the robotics club, that shared commitment to something. I think that's essential. And I think parents should need to push their kids in that direction, because at the end of each of those is a goal. There's an end of a season, there's an end of a semester, there's an end of a production. And having kids work towards that goal makes them just stronger, more resilient individuals.
Now, each of your sons are military officers. And I'm curious to know that whether that happened by accident or by design based on how you've described your parenting approach.
Again, I'll go back to, the sports analogy. From early on, I pushed them into sports, and fortunately they were good. But they're like every kid starting out at 4. Every kid starting out at 4 is on a pretty level playing field. It's how much you put towards it is how you get better. It's like the smart kids in a class who get good grades, who have to continue to get good grades or just do because they're very good at schoolwork. And in the midst of this athletic environment, again, they develop those qualities that we spoke of, or that I just talked about: resilience in adversity, hard losses, great wins, the discipline of sweating it out in a weight room or running around the block, 150 times, or having to do footwork drills at 6:30 in the morning. All that, and the leadership that's involved in it. And they were all 3-sport captains in high school, and they all went on to play college sports. They love that camaraderie of a team and that drive towards a goal. The military is very similar, and they like being around those kind of individuals. And they ultimately, that's where they ended up, in those kind of leadership positions, where you have to be decisive, you have to follow through with anything, and you have to be sharp and alert and rugged. And they proved that again and again. Some in some tight situations, and a lot of the stuff they learned as young boys really have helped them get through those situations.
Now, another interesting aspect of your story with respect to, raising your 3 boys is that you and their mother at one point parted ways. So there was a divorce involved. Correct. And I understand, because a lot of families are in that position today. Yeah. How did you go about navigating raising kids through a divorce and after, while still maintaining that strategy you've referred to and the parenting approach that you've talked about?
I'll say right now, my former wife gets 90% of the credit for how the boys turned out. I get 10% for being just a major league nag. We shared the same values. We shared the same thoughts about realizing the potential. And, having said potential, every kid has potential to be good at one thing. Every kid, rich or poor, religious or agnostic, whatever race, wherever they grow up, every kid has a potential. I'm old school that way, because when you talk about fatherhood or just parenting, let's say that, I've been around families and kids and parents in every venue under the sun for a quarter of a century. So I've pretty much seen it all, as many parents probably who are listening now. We had those shared values, so we were able to combine and just keep them moving forward. It was also, too, kids, and parents will get this really well, kids always have to be somewhere. So you're always driving them somewhere. It's to school, it's to practices, it's events, games. And so the time I spent around them all those years, it was every day of the week. And when you have 3 sons who play sports and who are gradually getting better and better at them, to the point where, as I noted earlier, the youngest kid was a first-team All-American NC2A athlete. You create that bond with them, and you drop everything to make sure they get to where they need to be. And one of the stats in an op-ed I did for the Washington Post, one of the stats that I mentioned is, for that single kid, all the way from 4-year-old soccer to his last game, winning the national championship in rugby, I attended 1,367 games. That's one kid. So, and all 3 kids played in college. So, you just treble that almost. But so if the dad or the mom in a divorced couple makes that effort, that shows up, that's the biggest thing. For adults and kids, just show up, be there, no matter how much of a pain it is. If you drive an hour and your kid never gets off the bench, you still have to show up. And that happened to me. I mean, plenty of times. Or you go to a swim meet after a 45-minute, tornado through traffic, and the kid's in the water for, 3 minutes. And then you got to drive back. So it's that showing up for your kids, and again, that shared values with the other spouse.
Along those lines, how would you characterize what concerns you as you look at the parenting landscape today? Is there something in particular that really strikes you?
Yeah, I go back, Lianne, to what I'd said earlier. The job of a parent is not to build that relationship with their kid. It's not to be liked. It's not to be their kid's best friend. It's to prepare them for the real world. No one gets a free ride. And the sooner a kid hits an obstacle, the better, because then you get to see how that kid can react to adversity and somehow, some way, get over it, around it, and put it in the rearview mirror, because those obstacles are going to come fast and furious every day and every year of their life as they grow up. Adults already know this because adults hit these obstacles all the time. And it's the idea of that parent being engaged enough to not worry about, well, Johnny and I are best friends. It's no, can Johnny cut it in the real world where the elbows are sharp and the edges are rough, and he's got to make his way. And this is the easiest time to make your way. This is a very wealthy country, as is Canada. The standard of living, the opportunities that these kids have. You know, my dad was 15, and he was, at age 15, was working in a vanadium mine a mile beneath the surface of the Sierra Nevada mountains. At 18, he participated in the invasion of Okinawa. Now, there's no such thing as emerging adults for a guy like that, you know. And it's not that, oh, the good old days were great because they were so harsh. It's the good old days had some good lessons about being steadfast and strong. And if you've got an increasing amount of kids who are emerging adults, you know, maybe the old values are worth just revisiting.
Jeff, what would you say you're most proud of as a dad?
I've seen these kids hit the wall, and again, and sometimes, you know, really tough, and they never quit. They never gave up. And sometimes the success wasn't immediate. Maybe it took months, but they never caved. And that's the most important thing. That if I can just get up and drive forward, you know, it's when I was in the Army, we had an old saying just screamed at us by every drill sergeant at Fort Benning. It was assess, adapt, advance. And that means if you were in a tight spot, you really had to think clearly and figure out how you were going to get yourself and your guys out of it. That's what I think I'm most proud of, that they've never, that the consistency of moving forward has never been obstructed by a momentary, saga.
Jeff Nelligan, author of 4 Lessons for My 3 Sons, How to Raise Resilient Kids. Thank you for sharing your lived experience with us today.
Thank you for having me, Lianne.
You can catch the full video interview with Jeff at whereparentstalk.com. That is our time for today. Thank you for listening. I'm Lianne Castelino. Till next time, happy parenting.
Sign up for Lianne's parenting newsletter and so much more at whereparentstalk.com. This is Where Parents Talk on 105.9 The Region.